What if I told you that the fate of an empire, the future of Egypt, and control of the world's most vital waterway were all decided in less than an hour? On September 13, 1882, under the cover of darkness, a British army crept through the Egyptian desert. Their target? An entire army, fast asleep. The assault they were about to unleash would be so swift, and so brutal, it would not only crush a nationalist revolution but also cement British control over Egypt for the next 70 years. This was no mere colonial skirmish. It was the violent birth of a new era, executed with a lethal efficiency that left the world stunned. So, how did it come to this? Why was a British army even in Egypt? Well, by the late 1870s, Egypt was a country being crushed by foreign debt. Years of ambitious projects, bankrolled by European lenders, had left the nation bankrupt. To protect their money, Britain and France set up a dual control over Egypt's finances, basically running the country's economy. The Egyptian ruler, the Khedive, was little more than a puppet, while ordinary Egyptians were taxed into the ground to pay off debts to bankers in London and Paris. This simmering resentment finally found a voice in one man, Ahmed Urabi. Urabi was different. He wasn't part of the Turkish elite who ran the army, he was a native Egyptian, from peasant stock. He was a charismatic speaker who captured the frustrations of his people with a simple, powerful message: Egypt for the Egyptians. In 1879, he led a mutiny that exploded into a full-blown nationalist revolution. The goal was to kick out foreign powers and build a government for all Egyptians. And for a moment, it looked like they might just succeed. Urabi became the Minister of War and, in the eyes of many, the real leader of Egypt. But a truly independent Egypt was a huge threat to the British Empire. The reason was the Suez Canal, the critical artery connecting Britain to its most prized possession, India. An Egyptian government that could, at any time, cut that lifeline was unthinkable. After a riot in Alexandria in June 1882 led to European deaths, Britain had its excuse. An Anglo-French fleet was already waiting offshore. The French hesitated and pulled back. Britain didn't. In July 1882, the Royal Navy unleashed a devastating bombardment on Alexandria, smashing its forts to rubble. The war had begun. With Alexandria in ruins, Urabi was declared a rebel. He fell back to defend the capital, Cairo, choosing his ground at Tel El Kabir, a strategic spot on the main route from the Suez. Here, his men worked frantically to build a 4-mile line of trenches and earthworks, backed by about 60 cannons. Urabi had a force of roughly 20,000 to 25,000 men. But their defenses were thrown together in a hurry and, crucially, the line was just too long for the number of men he had to defend it, a fatal flaw. To crush the revolution, Britain sent an expeditionary force of over 40,000 troops. Leading them was Lieutenant General Sir Garnet Wolseley, a man the Victorian public called, "our only general, the guy you sent when you absolutely could not afford to lose." Wolseley was the face of modern imperial warfare, a master planner and logistician. His army was an imperial machine, armed with modern rifles, supported by artillery, and trained to a level of discipline the Egyptians just couldn't match. Wolseley put on a good show, making it seem like he was going to attack near Alexandria to keep Urabi's attention fixed there. But his real plan was far more audacious. He would secretly shift his entire army to the Suez Canal, seize it, and then advance on Cairo from the east. The whole thing hinged on speed, secrecy, and surprise. After taking the Suez Canal and setting up a base, Wolseley prepared his masterstroke. Attacking the fortifications at Tel El Kabir in broad daylight would be suicide. His scouts reported a flat, open plain, a 5-mile killing field with zero cover. But they also found a critical gap in Urabi's defenses. At night, the Egyptians weren't posting sentries very far out from their lines. This was the opening Wolseley needed. He made an incredibly bold decision. He would march his entire army across the open desert in complete darkness and attack the trenches at dawn. You can't overstate the risk. One stray gunshot, one spooked horse, one navigational mistake in the pitch-black desert, and the whole plan would fall apart. At 1:30 a.m. on September 13th, nearly 17,000 British soldiers began their silent march. Orders were given in whispers. The soft sand muffled the sound of their boots. In the darkness, officers navigated by the stars. For hours, this ghost army crept forward, a silent, disciplined wave of steel, closing in on an enemy that was fast asleep, totally unaware of the doom that was coming for them. At 4:55 a.m., just as the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, a single shot rang out from an Egyptian sentry. A moment later, the night exploded. A wall of rifle fire erupted from the Egyptian lines, the muzzle flashes lighting up the faces of the defenders. But it was far too late. With a single, deafening roar, the British brigades charged. On the left, the Highland Brigade surged forward, their bagpipes screaming as they crashed into the trenches with fixed bayonets. The fighting was savage, close-quarters work. Some Egyptian and Sudanese soldiers fought back with incredible courage, making a stand at every turn. One young officer, Lieutenant William Edwards, won the Victoria Cross by charging a gun battery by himself and killing its commander before being struck down. But the shock and sheer momentum of the attack were unstoppable. Most of the Egyptian soldiers had been asleep moments earlier and were completely overwhelmed. While the infantry smashed the front, the British cavalry, having swept wide around the flank, now slammed into the Egyptian rear. This hammer and anvil blow cut off any chance of retreat and turned the battle into a rout. Panic tore through the Egyptian ranks, and thousands of soldiers broke and fled. The entire battle was over in less than an hour. It was a victory as stunningly complete as it was brutal. The consequences of that single, bloody hour would echo through Egyptian history for the next century. It's a shocking example of how fast the course of history can change. If you appreciate these stories about the forgotten turning points that shaped our world, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you don't miss what's next. The carnage at Tel El Kabir was appallingly one-sided. The British lost just 57 men killed and about 380 wounded. In contrast, it's estimated that around 2,000 Egyptian soldiers were either killed or wounded in the fighting and the rout that followed. The cries of the wounded filled the morning air. With Urabi's army shattered, the road to Cairo was wide open. The cavalry pushed ahead, and the capital was taken without a fight the very next day. Ahmed Urabi surrendered. The nationalist revolution was over. Urabi, the man who represented the dream of an independent Egypt, was put on trial and exiled to the British colony of Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. The Battle of Tel El Kabir was much more than a military victory, it was the final step in the takeover of Egypt. Britain put the Khedive back in charge, but everyone knew who was really running the country. Egypt was now under a veiled protectorate, a colony in everything but name, which would last until after the Second World War. British officials, backed by an army of occupation, held the real power. The impact of that brief, bloody hour at Tel El Kabir was felt for generations. For the British Empire, it secured the all-important Suez Canal, the jugular vein of its global power, and kicked off a new, more aggressive phase of expansion during the scramble for Africa. The victory was so perfect in its planning and execution that it gave rise to the popular phrase, "All Sir Garnet," meaning everything was in perfect order. For Egypt, the defeat was a national trauma. It extinguished the country's first modern nationalist movement and locked it into 7 decades of British domination. The dream of Egypt for the Egyptians, so fiercely championed by Ahmed Urabi, was crushed in the sand outside Tel El Kabir. Yet, the memory of Urabi and his revolt would endure, becoming a foundational story for future generations of nationalists who would eventually, after a long and difficult struggle, reclaim their nation's sovereignty. The Battle of Tel El Kabir is a powerful testament to how military force can alter the course of history in an instant. It was a clash between a rising industrial empire and a new nationalist movement. And in less than an hour, the outcome of that clash decided the future of Egypt and solidified the power of the British Empire at its absolute peak.